Hello. We've now reached the stage in looking at Bach chorales where we can try and put into practice the things that we've learned over the last few sessions about cadences and about typical melodic shapes that you'll find earlier on in a phrase, to try and see how we can put those all together and harmonize a complete phrase. Albeit I've chosen a very short phrase because I think that will demonstrate things very succinctly. Despite the fact that it's a short phrase and a very simple one, there's an awful lot that we can learn by looking at this. So I've picked this one, which is shown in front of you here. So this is a melody, remember, not by Bach, but one that Bach will have inherited. It's from the beginning of the chorale hymn Jesu meine Freude, which was written in the middle of the 17th century. Now, Bach returned many times to this particular chorale melody. It's used in a couple of his cantatas, but also very famously in a choral motet that also has the name Jesu meine Freude, where it's harmonized many, many times. And the simplicity of the melody means that there's an awful lot of different ways in which harmony and voice leading can be varied to produce something really quite interesting, and in some cases very moving. Now, we're not attempting to be moving in the way we're looking at this today. We're just looking at some of the mechanics of how you go about harmonizing this phrase. So your ear will have already told you that we're in E minor. And we just now have to think about what is the basic overall harmonic journey of this phrase. Where are we starting and finishing? Well, if we're in E minor, the most likely thing to happen is as follows. I will play this if you can listen and sketch down what you hear. So, pretty safe to say we're going to start on the tonic and we're going to finish with a perfect cadence, so 5-1. And that is the sort of bare bones of making a satisfactory start to harmonizing this. I've put in a bass line here starting and finishing on E at that pitch. We can look at different potential starting and finishing points later on, but the crucial thing really is what happens to this dominant. And I've put here two choices for the B. This simple choice as to whether you go up to the dominant or down towards it is actually one of the most important choices you're going to need to make. And it will affect the whole way the bass line evolves, and therefore some of the harmonic details in what you're going to see. So in the next stage, we're going to pick, I'm going to pick the rising version of this. We're going to look from how we get from this E here up to this B here. So I'm just going to delete that one for now and just think about this shape. So how are we going to make ourselves move from E up to B and back? Looking further down, in this version then I've added an extra couple of details. Replay that as many times as you like. And now I'm going to show you what I put in place here. So, as well as the opening tonic chord, I think you'll probably realize that as a step on the way to finding the dominant here, the place where we really need to change chord definitively away from the opening tonic is this point here, where we move to an A, the subdominant. So we're going from 1 to 4 to 5, and then obviously we'll finish on 1 again. So 1, 4, 5, 1 is a very simple and strong harmonic outline. And you can replay that and see if you can sketch in the inner voices that I've put in. So I'm just going to reveal the rest of the chords shown here. You have at this point really very little choice about where to place the middle voices, because there is only an octave between the bass and the soprano, so we pretty much have to put the C in the tenor and the E in the alto, and we can also sketch in the remainder of the lower the remainder of the middle parts in the cadence. So here we go. So harmonically satisfactory. It still doesn't yet sound very much like Bach. Well, let's see if we can make it sound a little bit more like Bach by trying to remember some of the things that we learned about cadential patterns. Now, at the end of the phrase, you should recognize that we have one of these 3 2 2 1 descending melodic shapes. And if you'll recall from our first session, one of the best ways of dealing with this is to produce, instead of 2 rather dull minims, at this point we replace that D sharp in the alto. We don't move straight to the D sharp. We use a suspension to delay the arrival on that. So have a listen to this, see if you can take this down by ear, and then we'll remind ourselves how it looks on paper. And I shall reveal the full version of that for us now. Okay, so there is the suspended fourth in the alto. Now remember that the suspension must be prepared. So that means we must have had it in the alto on the upbeat there. So I think we can safely sketch that one in. And we'll continue with our look at the bass part. Okay, so here's the information we've got in so far. Okay, so as well as the suspension, notice that we've got a couple of the other fairly typical things you'll find at a cadence. Rather than sitting on a minim for the whole of the dominant chord, you can quite happily drop an octave in the bass and then come back within it to resolve there. And in the tenor we have the passing dominant seventh on the last quaver, another very typical maneuver. Okay, so we've got the overall journey 1 4 5 1. We've managed to make the cadence, the 5-1 part of it at the end, sound a little bit more like the sort of thing that Bach might have. In the next couple of stages, we're going to see how we can make this journey in the bass a little bit more continuous. So have a listen to the next step, see if you can write down the bass part first of all. Again, in an earlier session, we looked at some of the little scale segments that you often find in chorale melodies. And here we've got a good example of moving 4, 3, 2. And in a minor key, you'll remember that one of the very typical ways of dealing with that is to intensify that subdominant chord on its way up to the dominant by turning into a diminished seventh. So this little passage here, I'm just going to focus on that and play it for you. And you can replay that and see if you can write in the parts, or maybe you'll remember it from the previous session. And now I shall reveal all that. Okay, so here we can see this typical chromatic movement, taking the lower 2 notes of this A minor chord and squeezing them up by sharpening them, moving the top note down through a seventh, which this is now diminished seventh. Okay, from A sharp to G is the interval of diminished seventh. The intervening notes are all minor thirds away from each other, and so the tension that's created in this chord is resolved by moving it again by step, everything contracting inwards, A sharp pulling up to B, G falling to F sharp. This motion is delayed still by this suspension, but eventually resolves down to the D sharp like this. Okay, so we'll just reveal the complete version of what we've done once again. And the full chord in the last bar. Okay, so at the beginning of the phrase, you'll notice we have repeated notes. Now, one of the ways in which repeated notes can be handled creatively is, rather than just simply playing the same chord again, I think we've remembered, is to change inversion. So listen to the bass part here and see if you can write down what we've got. And you can replay that to see if you can write in the bass part. Okay, I'm going to reveal the bass bit by bit. So we started obviously still in the same place on the tonic, and then we've used one of these typical kind of curling shapes in the bass where we are going between the root position and the first inversion using a passing note on the quaver, and to keep a little bit of rhythmic momentum we dip back down to the tonic, away the root of the chord, once we've hit the third, just so that we get a nice sort of smooth flow of quavers. So we're now in a position, I think, to listen to the whole thing again, see if you can write in some of the rest of the middle voices as well. And I hope you heard that the tenor begins with another feature of Bach's music that you'll often find, a set of parallel thirds between the bass and the tenor at this point. So I'll reveal the whole thing for us. It's this lovely kind of smoothly flowing shape in thirds, which carries on really for the whole bar. Notice that the alto part, the alto part does not look particularly interesting. This is sadly the fate of alto parts fairly frequently, but it's just not really possible to make all four voices interesting, in inverted commas, at the same time. That would probably result in a bit of confusion. So while the tenor and the bass have this interesting line, it's perfectly okay for the alto just to be sat on the E, which is the note that binds the whole texture together. Okay, I shall play this phrase, completed phrase, one more time. So this is a version of a harmonization of this. I haven't quoted Bach directly. This is just something I've made up using some of the ideas that we find in Bach. As a reminder, he came to this phrase many times, and what you need to know is that even in this one chorale, Jesu meine Freude, that melodic shape with which it begins also serves as the final phrase in the chorale. Bach always manages to ring the changes somehow in the way that he comes back to this phrase at the end of the chorale. So we're going to look now at another way of harmonizing this melody. Bear in mind, always, you should never necessarily go with your first thoughts when trying to harmonize something. Try lots of different things out and see what you think is most satisfactory. See if you can refine what you've done. So we're going to look back at this melody, almost with a blank slate again, and we're going to see what happens if we make the opposite choice to the one we did at the start. At the start, we thought, well, let's make the melody, the bass melody, move up towards B. So let's look there and let's now decide that we are going to choose the lower path. We're going to go from E down to that B. So to remove that from the equation and think, well, how are we going to fill this space in? Listen to this and see if you can write in the additional notes in the bass now. Okay, you can replay, and I'm now going to show you what we've come up with for the bass here. So this time we're still using the subdominant chord, chord 4, but we're going to use it in first inversion to create a sense of shape, moving gradually down from the E towards the B. And the middle voices we can also include. Apologies. So, something like this. As we move on, we will look at ways in which we can make this an even more interesting line in the bass. The gap between the E and the C rather invites completion by using simple stepwise motion downwards. And we're going to see if you can find the way in which that's dealt with in the next example. So in that, you'll have heard a complete bass line throughout the 2-bar passage, and you'll have also noticed that we've completed the cadence, because as we've seen before, this is one of the typical 3-2-2-1 patterns. This time, you'll notice that we've, if I replay that, we've not used the suspension figure, but we've used the 2-7-B-5-1 pattern. You can replay this example several times to see if you can write in the bass and the other parts so far. And now I'm going to reveal them. Okay, so we can see that the bass moves smoothly down E, D, C, and then we've reached this place where we've quite often found this before, called 1B, leading to 2-7B, and then 5 and 1, as we've heard before. And in the next example, we'll see how we can actually harmonize those first few notes. Now, we need to look carefully at this section again. Another example of using the pattern 4-3-2. So I'm going to get you to focus this time on what happens in the bass again at this point. And you can listen again to that if you wish. Now I'm going to reveal that for you. So the bass is moving this time in an entirely stepwise fashion. So rather than jumping down to G, we're going to use literally the step between the A and the C. And listen again to this pattern and see if you can remember the shape that I showed you on the way into a cadence pattern in a previous session when we looked at what to do with 4-3-2 as a melodic shape. Well, I hope you've now recognized in that section the use of this characteristic passing second inversion of the tonic as the chord that can successfully bind together our 4B chord and our 2-7B chord. It works so well because of the contrary motion here between the tenor and the bass, and the binding effect of the repeated note E in the alto, and the parallel sixths between the outer parts. Okay, here's the complete version. So we'll just remind ourselves of the complete cadence bar and the complete bass. Okay, so we're left with just the first two chords to harmonize properly, to find a way of doing this. You'll have noticed that I've kind of gone backwards through the chorale. Once I've sorted out the bass line, the tenor and alto are often most efficiently constructed by doing the cadence first and then working it backwards. How am I going to get to that place, rather than starting at the beginning and then ending up with a little bit of a problem of stitching together the beginning and the ending. So we've kind of worked it backwards here. Okay, so what to do with the first couple of beats? And you can replay that if you like. And I hope you noticed a nice flowing line in the tenor. I'll reveal the whole shape to you now. So we start on the tonic chord, fairly obviously, and I have made this shape in the tenor, which flows nicely through the use of passing notes. So the chord we have here on the second beat is the dominant chord in first inversion, and it's being used here in a way which conforms to the melodic minor scale. As the scale moves down in the bass, obviously we want to use the natural versions of the 7th and the 6th degree of the scale, because we're pulling downwards. Don't ever write a D sharp followed by a C. That would not be successful. Augmented intervals are not generally allowed. So the minor version of the dominant chord is used here, which we wouldn't normally use in a cadence, for example. But because we're not moving towards a tonic here, we don't need a leading note kind of effect. We've got this downward shape instead. Okay, so I'll play that one more time. And in my very last example, I'm going to show you what you might do if you want to create a bit more of a special effect. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this version we've just done. It's perfectly successful. But if I play you the next phrase and think, well, why would this be particularly good if we were coming to the end of the chorale? Remember, I said this phrase also appears at the end of the chorale, Jesu meine Freude. What is it that we're going to do here that makes it all the more kind of interesting and satisfying as a conclusion? And you can replay that several times now. There's a few things to point out. And now I shall reveal the whole harmonization. Okay, so a couple of things to focus on. First of all, we've used at this point that rather enhanced version of the 2/7B chord. So instead of just an F sharp half diminished seventh chord, we've taken F sharp and we've made it the root of an F sharp dominant seventh chord, because we've raised the third and we've raised the fifth. So this chord, remember what we've called this, is now a secondary dominant. It acts as the dominant of the dominant, so it moves in to resolve itself into the B major chord here. I'll just play that little section. And at the end, you'll notice that, as I said before, when we get to the final chord of a chorale, if we're in a minor key, we must end on a tierce de Picardy to make a major tonic chord. And the other thing we'll notice is that, just to give a greater sense of finality, the bass drops to the bottom E. You can write pretty confidently for a bass part that low. That's usually acceptable in Bach chorale style. So this bass now has a great sense of really reaching the bottom. And here's the whole phrase. So just to sum up, we've gradually built up, step by step, two ways of dealing with this phrase, both equally effective, and I'll play them one after the other. The first one gets its character really from the fact that we've moved up from tonic to dominant. We've used some passing movement, and we've used some chromaticism, and we've used a suspension. The second example got its character from the fact that we've moved down from the tonic to the dominant here, and then continued the journey downwards to the final tonic. Again, we can see some chromaticism, some passing movement, and the use of dissonance at the cadence point. So there we go. A very, very simple melodic shape that simply moved by step all the way through, and yet we've created something that's got some harmonic interest, nice part writing, and we found more than one way of harmonizing it successfully. So these are some of the things to draw from this in your attempt to emulate Bach style. Thank you for watching.